And now I have the honor and the privilege of introducing our guest teacher for this morning, Brian McLaren. Uh, Brian is a author, a pastor, an activist. Um, he is a guide of guides and a mentor of mentors. And in so many ways, he has very humbly helped shape the Christian conversation in North America for the past several decades. And I would dare to say that if in any way over the past several decades you've experienced a generous, creative, generative, just expression of Christianity, I would suspect that Brian's voice and influence in some way, directly or indirectly, was a part of that experience, even if you didn't directly know it. I'll say for me, quickly, and he's got a really extensive bio on his website. You can check that out. 19 years ago, I was in my first semester of Bible college in Chicago with all of these like hopeful and naive aspirations and sort of images of what it might look like to be a pastor or work in the church someday. And of course, the first few weeks of school, 9/11 happened. And in the following months, I found myself really rapidly discouraged by the political discourse, some of the religious rhetoric, and really how I was experiencing people making sense of what was happening in our country and in our world during that time. And I came home from Christmas break so disillusioned and so discouraged. And a mentor of mine at the time gave me a copy of one of Brian's first books, A New Kind of Christian. And I devoured it and had this sense that if this way is possible, then this is a path that I wholeheartedly want to keep going down. And I know Brian's work and Brian's voice has had that sort of impact on countless people around the country and around the world for so many years. So for that reason and for so many other reasons, Brian, we are so grateful for your willingness to join us this morning at Open Circle.
Oh, well, Matt, thanks for those kind words. That means a lot to me. And thanks to everybody who's been part of this this gathering. God bless you. God bless the good work that you're doing. I would like to just run through some slides with you all as part of my message for today. And I understand your series is The Possibility of the Moment. And today I'd like to talk to you about power and politics. Let me offer a definition of politics as the way human groups distribute and exercise power. And then let me offer a definition of power. Power is the ability to get work done. And then let me offer a definition of work. Work is time, talent, intelligence, money, and energy invested to achieve a desire. I always remember by TIME, time and talent, intelligence, money, and energy to achieve a desire. And of course, that raises the question, what are the desires that set the agenda for the work that we want to do, and then how we use power to achieve those desires. You may have noticed there's an election going on here in the US, and what happens in our nation every 4 years is we have a major set of arguments and discussions about desires. Some of the desires are obvious, some of the desires are camouflaged and covert, but we have a struggle to say which desires will determine how we distribute and exercise our power. I'd like to propose to you that to be a Christian is to live into Jesus's vision for distributing and exercising power to achieve the desires he modeled and taught. And what Christians call the gospel is good news about a new way of distributing and exercising power to a better set of desires. And I'd like to illustrate this with a story from the book of Acts in the New Testament. I think about Acts as kind of the sequel to Luke, which you could think of it as two parts of the story of the Spirit of God, the Spirit of the Holy, the Spirit of the divine, filling one individual named Jesus, and it's spreading to a community of individuals who try to bring that same spirit, that same vision to the world. So I'm just going to jump right in. In the middle of Acts, there's a fellow named Paul, and Luke, who writes this, is accompanying him along with several others, Silas and others. They're in a ship. From Troas, we put out to sea and settled straight for Samothrace, and the next day we went into Neapolis. Now, for us, we hear those names, they don't mean anything to us. But if you were to say somebody got on a plane and flew to Ferguson, and then they flew to Flint, Michigan, and then they flew to the Pentagon, you understand, each of these places would have meaning. And that's especially the case when they travel to Philippi, a Roman colony. This is the first time this little movement from the hinterlands of Palestine now is spreading and is actually going to have a concerted messaging campaign. They're going to, in a sense, bring the campaign to a Roman colony, a city that is an outpost of the Roman Empire. And it's the leading city of that district of Macedonia. They stayed there several days. So if you want to think about it, from down in the bottom right corner, from Judea, Jerusalem, Samaria, they're on their way to Rome. And now they're kind of at the halfway point, but this is their first time on Roman territory with this alternative message about a different way of distributing and exercising power. Keep that in mind as we read. On the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river where we expected to find a place of prayer. We sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. Very, very significant. Luke is sensitive to this in his gospel, and here in the Acts of the Apostles. Women in the Roman Empire are marginalized from power. If they want to have power, they can't get into the old boys network. Now, I know Kristen, who's going to speak to you next week, this is something she talks about so eloquently. But these old boys networks where men hoard and control their power for their benefit of their club, they control things in the center. But out in the margin, outside the city, are some women. One of those listening was a woman from the city of Thyatira named Lydia, a dealer in purple cloth. She's a worshiper of God. The Lord opened her heart to respond to Paul's message. When she and the members of her household were baptized, she invited us into her home. If you consider me a believer in the Lord, she said, then come and stay in my house. And she persuaded us. This woman is not identified as anybody's husband. She is an independent woman who, of some means, a businesswoman. She has a large enough house that she can take this whole entourage into her home. So now we see some interesting power dynamics at work. Once we were going to the place of prayer, we were met by a female slave. Now, in the Roman Empire, I know it's hard to imagine a world where women are subordinated and put into a position of lower power, where they're paid less, where they're given less respect, where they're given less a share of the political power. But let's imagine that world. And at the bottom of the pyramid of the whole economy are slaves. So when you have a female slave, you have a person with the least power of anybody in that culture. We're met by a female slave who had a spirit by which she predicted the future. Now, if you think that sounds a little woo-woo, just remember, if you were to find today's comparison might be someone with a 1-900 number or with an internet site, who has to do anything they can do to get a little bit of money. And so she is being oppressed by a group of men who own her and are forcing her to do something to make money, of which they will take the vast majority, or all of it, really. She earned a great deal of money for her owners by fortune telling. She followed Paul and the rest of us, shouting, "These men are servants of the Most High God, who are telling you the way to be saved." Now, just remember, here is a woman who works hard, but other people profit from her labor way more than she does. An economy that benefits a few at the top. So now you see how power and wealth are concentrated. And I'm sure you all know something so similar is going on. We're in the midst of an economic shift where more and more money is held by a smaller and smaller group of people at the top of the pyramid. And along with that money comes power, power to buy political advertising, power to pay lobbyists to influence politicians. You understand money and power to go together, and how and our world has so much in common with this world. And so this slave woman sees Paul and his entourage, and she shouts out, these men, she knows how the world works. These men are servants or slaves. They're free, but in a certain sense, they're slaves, but they're slaves not of just our Roman and our Greco-Roman panoply of gods. They're slaves of this Most High God, and they're telling you the way to be saved. Now, if you grew up in church as I did, you hear that word saved, and you think you know what it means. But remember, this is a slave woman, a slave girl in a Roman colony. And when she hears the word saved, when she uses the word saved, she has no idea of all these theological associations. This word has meaning to her. What could that word possibly mean? She kept this up for many days. Finally, Paul became so annoyed. Now, listen, I have no idea why Paul is annoyed. We could, depending on what you think of Paul, you'll probably decide why he's annoyed. But he says to the Spirit, in the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to come out of her. And at that moment, the Spirit left her. The jig is up for her way of making a living. He, in a sense, has shut down her way of making a living for her benefit. When her owners realized that their hope of making money was gone, see what this is all about. You see how money is related to power in these political situations. They seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to face the authorities. They brought them before the magistrates and said, now, do you understand? This sounds a whole lot like how our world works today. Corporate leaders have unimaginable power in front of the magistrates. And they say, these men are Jews. Now, here's anti-Semitism creeping up into their culture. I happen to be part of the clergy protest in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017. So I have seen this current resurgence of anti-Semitism. And you want to know something interesting about anti-Semitism through the centuries. It goes back to the fact that the earliest Jews dared to believe that the God of the universe cared about slaves, cared about them when they were slaves. And so, in a sense, these guys, when they get mad at Jews, they're saying, see, they're coming here doing what they do everywhere. They are against slaveholding, throwing our city into an uproar, advocating customs unlawful for us Romans to accept or practice. What kind of customs? The custom of saying that slave lives matter, that girls' lives matter, that the people who the dominant forces say their lives don't matter, to Paul and his associates, they've learned the way of Jesus, and they say these people matter. They shouldn't be deprived of power. These people matter. The crowd joined in the attack against Paul and Silas. See, all of them are part of this economy that lives by exploiting people. And the magistrates ordered them to be stripped and beaten with rods. After they'd been severely flogged, they were thrown into prison, and the jailer was commanded to guard them carefully. When he received these orders, he put them into the inner cell and fastened their feet with stocks. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. Now listen, it hasn't happened too often, but I've been arrested for a good cause. And I've been part of protests, and I've been part of civil disobedience. And I want to tell you something. When people sing in prison, it's an extension of their protest. It's their way of saying, you can lock up my wrists, you can lock up my ankles, you can throw me in a cell and lock the door, but I'm going to still use the power that I have, my voice. And I'm going to continue to praise the Most High God, who doesn't enslave people, but who liberates people from slavery. Now, what happens next? Suddenly there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken, Some of us are going to say, well, I find this very hard to believe, even though earthquakes are quite common. This is a really unusual earthquake. They're quite common in that area of the world. But whether you take this literally or figuratively, think of what an earthquake represents. I've only ever been in one real earthquake that I could feel. It was in May 2010. It happened to be in Maryland, where I used to live. It was 4.5 on the Richter scale. I'll just show you one slide to give you an evidence of the devastation that we suffered. There it was. But of course, this is a really unusual earthquake because the prison doors fly open and everyone's chains come loose. Now, again, some of you might take this literally, some of you might just take it figuratively, but if an earthquake happens that causes no one to die, but only causes locks to come undone, what would that signify? The jailer woke up, and when he saw the prison doors open, he drew his sword and he was about to kill himself because he thought the prisoners had escaped. Now, you've got to imagine, why would this, we've already seen women at the bottom of the pyramid, and we've seen slave girls at the very bottom. But now we've got this guy who has a place in the pyramid of the Roman economy. Why would he kill himself? And I think you can see why. He knows he makes some money for being part of this system. But if the system sees him as a failure, if the system sees him as a loser, then he will be punished so severely that he would rather kill himself than experience what this system will do to him. But Paul shouted, "Don't harm yourself. We're all here." The jailer called for lights, rushed in, fell trembling before Paul and Silas. He then brought them out and asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" There's that word again. Again, if you grew up in church, you can be 100% sure you have no idea what they're talking about, because you've been taught this whole theological thing that has to do with theories of atonement and substitution, all these things. This has nothing to do with what that slave girl would mean by the word or what this jailer would mean by the word. What must I do to be saved? What could he mean? I can just put myself in his shoes, and I think he's saying, you guys were in chains and locked in a prison. I'm the guy with the key. But in a sense, you guys are free. You had the chance to escape, and you not only stayed here, you convinced the other prisoners to stay here so that I would not be killed. You operate on a completely different understanding of power than I do. You would stay here for my benefit. What's going on here? I have the key, but you're free. How can I be liberated the way you are? If you want a good synonym for saved, it's liberated. They replied, "Believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be liberated, you and your household." Then they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all the others in the house. At that hour of the night, the jailer took them and washed their wounds. You understand now? He's transformed. He's still part of that Roman hierarchy, but he's behaving differently. He's now using his home to wash and tend the wounds that his structure, the structure he's part of, inflicted upon these men. And he's putting food before them. He's using his personal power to show that they have dignity, they have value. And then immediately he and all his household were baptized. He washes them, they wash him. They're part of a whole new structure now. The jailer brought them into his house, set a meal before them. He was filled with joy because he'd come to believe in God, he and his whole household. When he stops believing in Lord Caesar at the top of this pyramid, and instead has confidence in Lord Jesus, someone who has a whole different way of distributing and exercising power, then he will stop oppressing the members of his household, and they will all experience genuine liberation. Well, the story is not quite over. When it was daylight, the magistrates sent their officers to the jailer with the order, "Release those men." The jailer told Paul, "The magistrates have ordered that you and Silas be released. Now you can leave. Go in peace." Paul and said to the officers, they beat us publicly without a trial, even though we're Roman citizens, and threw us into prison. And now do they want to get rid of us quietly? No, let them come themselves and escort us out. Do you see? This is the first sit-in that I'm aware of in biblical history. Paul and Silas say, we are going to have a sit-in. We're not going to leave until you acknowledge your abuse of power. We have citizenship. And so we're going to use that citizenship to make the magistrates face what they've done. The officers reported this to the magistrates. When they heard that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens, they were alarmed. They came to appease them and escorted them from the prison, requesting them to leave the city. After Paul and Silas came out of the prison, they went to Lydia's house. They basically said, we're going to leave town when we're good and ready. They stopped to see Lydia and where they met with the believers and encouraged them, and they left. So there you see it. The politics of the kingdom of God engages with the politics of the empire of Caesar. It begins with the marginal. It liberates the vulnerable. It infuriates the oppressors. It loves the enemy. It confronts injustice. We could say that internal spiritual formation in the way of Jesus is expressed through participation with the Spirit in the liberation of children, women, and men, starting with the weakest and the least and going all the way to confront those in power for their abuse. It raises the question for each of us. Where is your power, your time, talent, intelligence, money, and energy? What desires are you investing it in? You know, in an election season, I think we need a theology of voting. And I'd like to suggest to you that voting is a use of your power. If you don't vote, you're basically embracing the power of those who have it. But if you do vote and you only use it for yourself or your race or your party or your religion, you're just playing into the typical pyramidal structures. What would happen if you decided in this election to use your vote for those who are suffering and vulnerable? Not just human beings, but you understand we're experiencing an epical die-off of insects, reptiles, mammals, birds. Our economy is not only exploiting people, it's destroying the earth. What would happen if you made sure that your vote was for the benefit of the fish of the sea and the birds of the air? You use your vote, but it doesn't just end then. You use your voice. And those of you who have social media, you now have an instant global publishing platform. How can you use your voice and your media and your ability to organize and whenever necessary to show up in the streets and protest and use the presence of your body? Some of you maybe are going to, in the future, when you see how corrupt the current pyramids of power are, you're going to run for office yourself and do better. And in the meantime, you're going to remember that we not only cast a ballot once every 2 years or 4 years or whatever, but we also use our credit cards and our dollars to cast ballots for companies. What would it mean for us to understand that part of our power is how we use our money? And then, of course, we have to ask, what desire are we investing toward? Salvation, the liberation from human injustice, the liberation from human abuses of power. Jesus said, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice, those who are persecuted for justice, those who desire power to be rightly distributed and rightly used so that everyone and everything that God loves deserves the care and protection and dignity that God desires. The possibility of this moment is that you and I finally get the message that Jesus had from the beginning and begin to live with a new vision for how power is distributed and exercised in our world. Amen.